It's social distancing at the chamber. My name is Garrick Taylor. This is also what we call happy hour with Hammer. We're joined by the CEO of the Arizona Chamber, Glenn Hammer. Glenn, the stars are out today. We have two all-stars from the world of think tank land. Why don't you introduce our special guests?
Thank you, Garrick. We're pleased to welcome for a second time Dr. Michael Strain. We got big ratings on the first show, who is the Director of Economic Policy Studies and the Arthur F. Burns Scholar in Political Economy at the American Enterprise Institute. When he joined us earlier this year, we were still in the pandemic, we discussed his latest book, The American Dream is Not Dead, but Populism Could Kill It. It's right behind me somewhere with Hayek, Friedman, and other Adam Smith, other great economists, and I'm serious about that. Great book. And we enjoy reading his regular columns that are printed in publications, prominent publications across the country. Welcome back, Dr. Strain.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us today is Rick Hess, Director of Education Policy Studies at AEI, where he works on K through 12 and higher education issues. Education wonks are likely familiar with his regular contribution to Education Week's Rick Hess Straight Up feature. Dr. Hess is a legend in education policy and reform circles. We've had him out here in Arizona. I remember when humans were able to interact, we had a chance to meet a year or so ago. And welcome, Dr. Hess.
Hey, good to be with you.
Dr. Hess, I'm going to start with you. There's a measure on the ballot here. You can see both Garrick and myself, we have a no on Prop 208 sign, where that proposes a dramatic, really a doubling of our top income tax rate to direct revenues to the state's K through 12 system. The initiative doesn't require any academic outcomes or lay out any expectations for improved performance. No accountability, no reforms. Before we get into the particulars of the measure, let me ask you this. To what extent do higher tax rates mean a better education system? And should voters even seek reforms? Or is the key first to simply increase spending on education?
So it's a good question. You know, higher tax rates may or may not lead to a lot more revenue. I'll leave that to you guys to sort that stuff out. That's, Strain and Hayek and Friedman kind of sort through these things. Love that. So I'm going to give you so much grief about that. But look, more fundamentally, does spending more money on education help? We can get into the details, but let's keep it real simple. Sure, it can. I mean, the way the world works is when you have more money, you can buy more stuff. So if you're spending more money to hire better teachers, to get kids better support systems, it can make a difference. Of course it can. The question is, does money usually get spent that way in our public school systems? And unfortunately, the answer is too often not. It doesn't, because there's a lot of political pressures that make it hard to actually assess whether you're getting much bang for the buck. Superintendents and school boards are hugely reluctant to ever contemplate ending a program or putting an end to a position, whether or not it's making a difference for kids. There's a huge temptation to just kind of figure out how to keep doing what you're doing and placate the interests, which is why 20%, 30% of outlays are going to get tied up in pensions and healthcare that aren't making a difference for kids. It's why in Arizona, for instance, more than 10% of district outlays are tied up in administration, and only 54% actually make their way into the classroom. So can more money help? Of course it can. Would I be confident that a big increase in state spending was going to make a big difference for kids with no other attention to reform or improvement? I'd be hugely skeptical.
Thank you. Dr. Strain, as you know, Prop 208, which, by the way, has been endorsed by Bernie Sanders, and breaking news today by the New York Times, would raise the state's top individual income tax rate from the current 4.5% to 8%, which is a 77.7% increase. It would target individual filers earning more than $250,000 annually and joint filers making $500,000 annually. And as we know, this would hit a lot of Arizona small businesses that file through the income tax portion of our tax code. What do we know about the economic performance of states with relatively high income tax rates? This would put us in the top 10 with Vermont, New York, California. What do we know about the performance of those top states versus lower tax states like, say, Tennessee, Florida, and Texas? Thank you, Dr. Strain.
Well, a lot of things affect state economic performance. It seems to me that right now, increasing the top state income tax rate by 3/4, by 77%, is really not what you want to be doing. We have a weak economy, and we had great GDP growth numbers this morning for the U.S. economy overall. But even given how strong the economy performed in the third quarter, the U.S. as a whole is still only about 2/3 of the way back to where it was before the pandemic. There's really no question but that the economy will be smaller and there will be less income in the economy at the end of 2020 than there was at the end of 2019. So we're gonna end the year down, which is a bad place to end the year. If you're talking about a tax increase of that magnitude in Arizona, you're going to push the Arizona economy in the wrong direction. You're going to see less work. You're going to see less income, which is going to weigh on consumer spending, which is going to ripple throughout the economy of Arizona. Really importantly, Arizona is going to lose a lot of businesses, and that's not unique to Arizona. In a recession as severe as the one we've had, a lot of businesses are going to go out of business, and for Arizona to get back on its feet and to get to where it was before the virus and to get where it was before the lockdown orders, we're going to need to see some new businesses start in Arizona to replace the businesses that have gone under. And a lot of businesses pay income tax on the individual side of the tax code, particularly a lot of businesses that are just starting out. And so what Prop 208 would do is create an obstacle to new business formation, create an obstacle to entrepreneurship at exactly the time when Arizona should be encouraging new businesses to start, encouraging entrepreneurs. So it really works in exactly the wrong direction.
Garrick, you want to ask a few questions, please?
Glenn, I just write the script, so you take it from here. Well, if I have any follow-ups, I'll jump in.
All right. Well, Dr. Strain, as you said, we're still in the pandemic. I mean, it looks at least 3 of us, I believe maybe all 4, may be in a home office. I'll say for myself, I'm politely defining that term. And the challenges that we're dealing with this. The one thing I wanted to ask is just this idea of income tax and regional competitiveness. It's probably difficult to see, but should Arizona be concerned that, California, a big part of our migration has been from California and what the governor likes to call Chicago and Illinois, our favorite suburb. When you look at this chart, Colorado is about 4.5. New Mexico is a little bit higher than 4.5. Utah is a little bit higher than 4.5, and Nevada is 0. Should we be concerned from a regional competitiveness standpoint, or could we just, when we're competing with Colorado, say we have a lot more 110-degree days than you, so please come to Arizona and pay higher taxes?
Yes, I would be concerned from a regional competitive standpoint. Even given the 110-degree days. California is a high tax state, and over the past several years, businesses and individuals that don't want to pay those tax rates move next door to Arizona. And a lot of businesses, when they're thinking about where to locate, take these sorts of tax considerations into account, particularly within a region, as you describe. And if I were in charge of tax policy in the state of Arizona, which I'm not, I would want to make Arizona a really business-friendly state. And Arizona's got a lot going for it, and in many ways, it's kind of an up and coming place. And the juxtaposition between Arizona and California really makes Arizona an attractive place to live and an attractive place to start a business. I wouldn't want to go backwards from that, which it seems like maybe happening.
Dr. Hess, the proponents say that this is that Arizona has a teacher shortage, but isn't there a teacher shortage nationwide? Can you talk a little bit about that issue? Because I don't believe that's a unique argument to Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, the teacher shortage, there's two things you hear every time we have this conversation, which aren't really helpful. One is that there's a teacher shortage, and the other is that we've been disinvesting in public education. Well, we have had a teacher shortage every year, according to these voices, for the last half century. There will never be a day when we don't have a teacher shortage, because the real teacher shortage is that we have 300,000 vacancies a year in K-12 education, and we have chosen to make it really hard to fill them. These vacancies are generally not, say, in K-6 education. Turns out there's a lot of people who are able to teach. It's that we have a lot of certification barriers. So if you have adjunct faculty, for instance, at say Arizona State, who have been teaching chemistry or been teaching mathematics, and because of the pandemic, they're no longer needed, if they tried to walk across the street and apply to a K-12 district, they would be told, no, thank you. It doesn't matter how well they know their subject. It doesn't matter how good they are in a classroom. We have created huge hurdles to being a teacher in K-12. Why is there a teacher shortage? Because we have chosen to create one often through the advocacy of the same folks who now lament it. So look, average Arizona teacher pay is about $52,000 a year, according to the state auditor. The NEA has it pitched about $1,000 lower. That means if you have a two-earner household of two teachers in Arizona, they're making six figures, about $104,000 a year for a 190-day work year. Now, your viewers will have to decide whether that is appallingly underpaid. I think data across the nation suggests that teacher pay is not out of whack with what professionals with those credentials might expect to earn in general. And would I like to see good teachers paid more? Absolutely. But that suggests that the opportunity here is part of the initiative would be creating new pathways in the teaching profession where folks work a 12-month year, are paid like 12-month professionals, rather than simply putting a lot of resources into districts and hoping they get spent. That's because the other great myth that we hear, the other great assertion we hear all the time is that we've been disinvesting in education. Nationally, over the last 2 decades, we've actually increased after inflation per pupil spending by more than 30%. Yet you heard repeatedly on the campaign trail this fall and this summer that we have disinvested in public education. A 30% after-tax per pupil increase in no way, shape, or form qualifies to me as disinvestment. In Arizona, school spending is up about 20% per pupil over the last 3 years. Now, a chunk of that has actually gone into heightened administration costs. And like I mentioned before, the auditor reports that only about 54% of that is finding its way into classrooms. So one way to think about this is that you're trying to fill up a swimming pool with a leaky bucket. Some of that water in that leaky bucket will get into the pool. But one of the big questions here is, will enough water get into the pool to make a difference? And when we're dealing with, if you're talking about a package of reforms, thinking differently about teacher retirement benefits and healthcare, you're talking about staffing differently, you're talking about holding schools responsible for serving kids well, then I am wide open to the argument that we ought to be increasing investment in schools. But the idea that we ought to just be throwing a lot of dollars and saying, boy, we hope these get spent differently than the money that's gone before, I tend to be real unenthusiastic about that approach.
Dr. Hess, though, your point about alternative pathways into the teaching profession, we've seen efforts to do so in Arizona, including in the charter sector. But now we're being met with the argument from the proponents of Prop 208, which is, well, we still have a shortage when it comes to certified teachers, arguing that the certified teacher is the more optimal position in the teaching profession. Do they have a point?
No, there's zero empirical evidence that teacher certification has any kind of impact on outcomes for kids, either academically or in terms of soft skills. In fact, it's interesting. Arizona has the largest charter school sector in the nation. 16% of kids in Arizona attend charter schools. Arizona charters outperform Arizona district schools on math, on reading, on graduation rates, even though they only spend about 90 cents on the dollar for what district schools are spending in Arizona. So look, if their response had been, we're having trouble hiring terrific STEM teachers, science, technology, engineering, math teachers, because pay is not competitive, that Arizona does rank in the bottom quintile of American states on spending, and that, look, some smart investment could really make a difference. And here's how we're going to spend those dollars to get the talent we need and to keep great teachers. I would be sympathetic to that argument. Massive increases with no commitment, with no transparency, with no expectations of change is not how I would go about pursuing real improvement for kids.
Well, as part of that last thread is that the Goldwater Institute did a study that demonstrates that from this new proposition, about 13 cents on the dollar would wind up in teachers' pockets. Teachers as we would all define teachers. This is an important point because the Prop 208 proponents are proudly saying this is going to go to support personnel. This is going to go to the people serving lunch in the schools, to the people driving buses. Now, honorable work, very honorable work. But Dr. Hess, you have a wide range of knowledge in education. Is there any connection that you're aware of between increased teacher bus pay and academic performance?
No, and there's not even, forget academic performance. There's no relationship between this and anything in terms of students' quality of life that we know of, or family engagement with schools. Look, I'm all for paying bus drivers more.
Sure.
I'm for folks earning a living wage. But, one, we've seen routinely school districts have adopted habits where they spend lots of money on auxiliary services in ways that make them much more expensive than other competing enterprises. And, if we're talking about a limited number of education dollars, the reason we fund schools is not so that folks who work in auxiliary jobs can take home a little bit more, but so that we can make a difference for kids and their families. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. And the second thing is, look, so long as schools are being told that their job is not to make a difference for kids, but to be employers of last resort, I think where we got to expect that we're not going to see schools excel for kids, that we're going to see them instead compromised by an effort to placate a bunch of local interests. And so if that is one of the arguments being advanced for a policy, I think folks have got to take a long, hard look and ask, what the heck are we trying to do here?
Dr. Strain, the proponents love saying that this only targets the 1%, and that, I mean, again, it's not a joke. This is what resulted in Bernie Sanders tweeting out his strong support for the proposal. You can't write this stuff. What are your thoughts when tax policies go down this direction of trying to just hit the quote unquote 1%? What's the how does this generally play out in terms of a state's economic performance? Does it affect the other quote unquote 99%, either in lost jobs or reduced wages, or in any way that our viewers should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, it's harder to target the top 1% than a lot of people who are enthusiastic to do that seem to think. Again, a lot of the entities that will get hit by this are businesses, and when you raise taxes on businesses, that affects workers' wages, workers who are outside of the top 1%. Uh, I want to also just go back to the timing of this. If you slow business activity in the state of Arizona, if you slow entrepreneurship and slow the rate of new business formation in the state of Arizona, if you reduce private incomes in the state of Arizona, all of which a 77% increase in the top income tax rate would do, then you're just going to hurt the performance of the Arizona economy overall at a time when Arizona, like every other state in the country, is very weak. And that is not going to only affect the top 1%. That's going to affect the entire state's economic performance in an objective sense. If other states are doing things to encourage entrepreneurship, to encourage business formation, then you're going to put Arizona at a regional competitive disadvantage as well. So it's just not, as a general principle, when you have really elevated unemployment, when you're going to end the year worse off than you began it, when you're going to end the year with lower incomes than you started, it's just a bad idea to raise taxes. It's not the time to do it.
We're still down about 125,000 jobs here, even though our Governor Ducey's done a great job managing the pandemic. Certain sectors, tourism, restaurants, way down. And Art Laffer and Steve Moore did a recent report for us that suggests we could lose 250,000 jobs should this pass. So during a pandemic. And one of the arguments we've also made is for the neighboring states, all they have to do is adopt the sit on your tuchus strategy, because we're blowing ourselves up by doubling our income tax rate, and they're much lower. There's just the mobility of people who can invest in businesses is pretty high. And that, I know this as a guy who grew up in New York and saw the state empty out into Florida over the past many decades.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, I think it's those regional issues are serious. You're right that if Arizona becomes less friendly to entrepreneurship, and if Arizona becomes a less attractive place for high income people to live, even if the surrounding states do nothing, their relative advantage is increasing. Again, I think it's just, if you are a state government, if you are the federal government, now is the time to be doing everything you can to support existing businesses, to encourage new businesses to start, to support consumer spending. This is the reason why a standard macroeconomic policy prescription is to run a deficit during a severe downturn, because you don't want the government to be taking resources out of the private economy for public use. You want to borrow what you need for public use. Now, states can't run deficits as a general matter, and so states are at a disadvantage there. But states can raise taxes and increase regulatory burdens and do things of that nature. They shouldn't. The federal government should be running a deficit, and state government should be doing everything they can do to avoid counter-cyclical policy, to avoid raising taxes and making it harder for businesses at a time when the economy is weak.
Thank you. Dr. Hess, with your national perspective, the NEA, National Education Association, has put in millions of dollars into this Proposition 208. What should our viewers know about the overall NEA agenda?
That the NEA is interested in seeing more dollars spent on schools, more dollars spent on educators and lots of other people who work in schools who aren't necessarily educators, that the NEA has shown little or no concern over time about how effectively these dollars are spent. In fact, the NEA has consistently come out against any form of accountability or transparency. I'm not just talking about grading schools on test scores, which we can have, thoughtful, legitimate conversations about how useful that is. I'm talking about trying to make sure that we see where dollars are going, understand what percentage of school spending is actually going into the pockets of people who are teaching kids, versus subsidizing pensions and healthcare for people who stopped working in the school system 5 years ago. And the NEA has never, in my career, shown a lot of concern for, how these dollars are utilized or making sure that taxpayers know where they're going.
My final question, then I'll turn it over to Garrick, is for Dr. Strain. I mean, you've done just the AEI has done just brilliant work, and I always love when you have pieces with Dr. Gottlieb, who I follow religiously, with what we should do on the pandemic side of the equation, including wearing a mask. How should we be thinking about things in terms of the post, or the sort of the post-COVID economy? The Wall Street Journal's written a number of stories of tech companies now saying you can work anywhere. We see maybe migration patterns accelerating outside of certain city centers. How should we be thinking about that in terms of any sort of proposal that would raise income tax? It seems like any state, I'm a big sports guy. There's a lot of free agents out there. And I think we should be thinking in those terms, in terms of designing tax policy. Am I off on that? I'm not an economist, so you are.
I mean, I think if I think if I were the state of Arizona, I would be at least thinking about whether or not I could attract a bunch of Silicon Valley tech workers who may need to be in the Valley a couple days a month, but who might want to avoid paying California income taxes because those taxes are so high. And is there a way to encourage that? Can we get commuter flights from Phoenix to the airports around Silicon Valley, and can we put that idea on the radar for those workers? What can be done? I mean, I think a lot of it remains to be seen. Looking at the economy as a whole, I'm relatively skeptical that we're going to see a big move toward people working remote permanently. Having said that, so few people do work remote permanently that you could double the number of people who are working remotely. It'd still be a small share of the workforce, but you could have a pretty large relative increase. And from my conversations with people in the tech sector, the tech sector seems to be more serious about this than I think a lot of other sectors of the economy. And so, just given Arizona's physical proximity to California, it'd be something I would be thinking about.
Thank you, Garrick.
Well, before we close it out, Dr. Hess, I just want to get your take on NAEP scores. That's the story this week that are out. There's some real concern about that. As Glenn mentioned, this proposition doesn't have anything in terms of academic outcomes or academic expectations. Going forward, do you think state legislatures are going to be digging into this issue of academic outcomes in light of these recent scores? Pretty much for the last decade, every time the NAEP scores, the National Assessment of Education Progress, comes out, this week we've seen the 12th grade reading and math scores. It's been a pretty dismal story for a solid decade now, and we haven't actually seen a lot of evidence that folks have good ideas about how to change that trajectory. I think one thing is, surprisingly, perhaps, Arizona has actually fared pretty well in terms of its rate of increase
over the last dozen years or so. So going back to about 04, 05, Matt Ladner has written about this at some length. Arizona has been, pretty impressive. And particularly its charter sector seems to be a big factor in this. And so when folks say, well, we haven't been spending enough, one question is, well, how come, what are we doing that seems to be making a difference? And this is one of those places where I think, sports analogies came up. There are teams that have so much, that are so strapped that they are forced to rethink what they're doing and to be more disciplined and more purposeful. And sometimes having more money, even though money is generally a useful thing, having more money can sometimes be an excuse, a Band-Aid, not to make hard decisions, not to rethink things that aren't working, not to figure out where we should go. And so one of the reasons I'm always concerned when I hear about proposals for big new spending and nothing else is I worry that the dollars themselves can actually become an excuse not to make other necessary changes, the kind indicated by what we've seen in these scores. And look, let me just, Arizona does not look good when you look at the national per pupil spending. I'm sure you guys have said this. I know you guys have been out there fighting to make sure that there's smart investments in Arizona schools over time. Arizona, spends about $9,000 a kid. That's a fair bit of money, but it's actually a lot less than the national average of about $14,000 a kid. But anybody out there, anybody viewing this who's under the impression that if you guys increase school spending by a lot, that the folks who are calling for 208 would say, oh, good, we're there. We got what we need. It ain't going to happen. New York City spends $28,000 and change per kid a year. $28,000 per kid a year. This spring, before COVID started, Chancellor Richard Carranzo went to the city council and explained, I've already cut through muscle, through flesh, and into bone. He'd added 390 positions, I think, in the administrative offices last year. That is cutting into bone. So look, part of the mentality here that we have to just be responsible when we think about is that there will never be a day in the 21st century when advocates for ed spending won't say schools are underfunded. They won't be say, they will always be telling us we've been disinvesting, and they will always be telling us there's a teacher shortage. They raise, there's important valid points. States have to make every effort to do right by their kids. But I think it's the part of civic leaders, of the business community, of public officials to make sure they're helping citizens think about when dollars are being spent in a way that really is making a difference for kids. And when we're just, trying to carry that leaky bucket over to a pool.
Great. Well, thank you. Glenn, why don't you close us out?
I just want to thank both of you, Dr. Strain and Dr. Hess. AEI just does phenomenal work across the board, and it's our great privilege and honor to have you on our show today. And there's just so much good information for our viewers to really digest. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. It's always good to be on.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be with you. And good to see you, Mike. I miss you, man.
Yeah. Yes. One day we'll be together again.
And you have a standing invitation to return to Arizona very, very soon. So we're looking forward to hosting both of you in person when it's prudent to do so.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
I love Scottsdale.
It's where I live. So please stay well, stay safe, and again, thank you for all the good information you put out for all of us. It's just dynamite. Thank you.